Hey, hello, and welcome everyone to our Friday evening monk chat, your live stream from Empty Cloud Monastery. I hope that you're all doing well wherever you are, whether you're watching this live. We have a few people joining in person, so we have the real live audience, and we also have some people joining in live online. I see greetings and Anjali from Julie from Quebec. Hello, Julie, and Richard from Bolivia, as well as Mariah and Lydia, Victoria, Rick. Our cows are friends, Bhumika, so lots of friends joining in and other people who may be joining in later on. So this is our time, our monk chat, where you can feel free to ask questions related to the Buddha, related to the Dhamma, related to the Sangha, related to meditation or being a monk. So anything that you'd like that is relevant to monks and Buddhism and meditation, you can leave that in the live chat box and we will take a look at it. And if it's something that is appropriate, we'll address it to the best of our ability. And then people joining in live also may have questions. So we will, don't worry, online friends, we will prioritize you because we have a Q&A time here at the monastery most days. But you're also welcome to ask questions. Okay, so at this time, I'll render homage to the Buddha, who is our original teacher, the reason why we have access to these teachings, the reason that we can gather here today, and then we can go ahead and look at the questions that might be popping in. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang saranang gacchami. Okay, so I see a question already in from Richard. Richard asks, on right speech, the Buddha said, when not asked, one says good of others and ill of oneself. And when asked, one says little ill of others and good of oneself. In the practice, the part of speaking ill of myself, when not asked, hasn't worked at all for me. When I do it, people get annoyed with me, thinking that I'm an idiot. Okay. I must have got wrong that part. So how does that part really work? Thank you. Well, okay, so that's a good question, So you're referencing a teaching that you say the Buddha says, which is that when we are, asked, then we should say good about other people. And we should not say, we should tend to talk down ourselves. And when we're not asked, then we should, or actually, I'm sorry. So when we are asked, we should say little ill of others. And wait a minute, what does it say here? What did you say? Did you get this right? When not asked, one says good of others and ill of oneself. And when asked, one says little ill of others and good of oneself. Okay, yes. So the idea being that, for example, the Buddha says, see if it comes to my mind. He says, Yo attano silavatani janto ananuputthova presapava anariya dhammang kusalatamahu yasus yo atmanang sayameva pava. So one who unasked speaks, oh, I have these, he says, I'm sorry, this is irrelevant for those, but anyway, he says, Yo atmano silavatani janto iti hanti sile. So, okay, anyway, I'm not going to go through it. So anyway, he says that people who boast about their precepts, they boast about their vows without being asked, that those people are of an ignoble nature, say the experts, because they speak of themselves without being asked. The idea being that, you might say, like, let's say that you are, Richard, you're a lay Buddhist, and let's say you're very diligent, and you say, well, I follow the 8 precepts every week on the Uposatha days, and I follow the 5 precepts, and I meditate every morning, and I do this and I do that. And the Buddha is saying, that is ignoble, because you're just kind of boasting about yourself, right? So, and then he says, so when you're not asked, you should speak good of others and, downplay yourself. So speak of your faults, basically. Meaning, like, when you're not asked, you don't kind of walk into a group and start boasting about yourself, but you say, like, oh, you talk about the good qualities of other people and you humble yourself. And when you are asked, then you, like, asked about other people, you don't speak ill of them, right? You speak very little bad about them and good of oneself. So the idea being that, let's say someone asks you like, oh, did you hear what so-and-so did? Or, and you downplay it. So meaning that you don't like exaggerate and you don't indulge in speaking ill of them, but maybe you just focus on the good that you do. So maybe you just say, well, I try to, maybe someone says, oh, did you hear about this? You say, yeah, well, maybe I'm sure they have their circumstances, I just try to follow the precepts. So you just kind of talk about what you do, and you don't get involved in kind of overplaying the ill of others, the bad of others. So the Buddha instructs us, he says like when, for example, another thing is when a monk is when we're very similar teaching, maybe it's the same one, talking about like, we should be very slow to indulge in criticism about other people. Now, of course, this is to be balanced with admonishment, which is very important, especially in monastic life. But I would say also, for lay people, sometimes you get lay people and they just want to say what they say and they don't listen. And similarly with monks, if you have a monk who, someone says, oh, Venerable, you tend to be, make a mess, or you're not very cleanly, or you are, acting, maybe getting too angry, or maybe you should watch your desire, blah, blah, blah. Maybe you're too sleepy. I notice you nodding in meditation. And then they get defensive. So that would be a bad quality, right? Because the point is that we grow from admonishment. So we grow when others point out our faults. And the Buddha says in the Dhammapada that someone who points out your faults, you should treat them like they have buried treasure, because they're giving you access to attain awakening. They're giving you access to purify your mind. So yeah, the idea being that, you don't just go around speaking about all the good things you think about yourself. You tend to downplay it because you're developing humility. So then you say, when you do this, people get annoyed and they think you are, quote unquote, an idiot. So I would think that maybe you're doing something maybe too extreme. I don't know exactly what you're doing, Richard, but maybe if you're saying like, you just go to people and you start saying all the horrible things about yourself and, how you hate yourself and, you're a horrible person, then yes, that might be kind of strange, right? Because the Buddha is not saying that. He's more saying, you might say like, oh, it's humility, right? So the idea being that you really just focus on, you don't boast about what you think you have, but you just focus on what you don't have. Just focus on like, I'm still developing, I'm still training, I'm still cultivating. I don't have these qualities. I'm still working on these qualities. So it keeps you humble. And it doesn't mean you don't recognize your goodness. The Buddha also teaches even meditating on your sila, right? Meditating on your goodness, meditating on your generosity. And so that's supposed to uplift your mind, inspire your mind. But the point is of humility. It's not of hate. You're not supposed to hate yourself. That would be a form of pride. So when we talk about humility in Buddhism, we are talking about humility from both self-loving and self-hating, right? Because what is self-hating? It's I'm the best at being the worst. It's I am the best at being horrible. I am so much better than everyone else at sucking, right? So it's this idea of like, I am different from everyone. I'm special. And the Buddha is saying, no, you're not. You're not special. Not special in the good way, and also not special in the bad way. And even you're not even equal. The Buddha says, not even conceiving I am equal. So none of those is right. So just you just take yourself out of the picture. And that is real humility, right? Real humility is just, you just don't go around praising yourself. You just focus on the qualities that you're still developing. So yeah, it shouldn't be strange. It should be normal. Like it should be a normal, when someone is humble, that's what they tend to do, right? They don't say like, oh, look at this and that, but rather they tend to, focus on how they're still working, they're still developing and so on. So it shouldn't be strange. I would say you're probably doing something too extreme if people get annoyed when you do that. So yeah, it's just a simple thing, and in terms of when not asked, the idea being that like if no one asks you, you don't need to like intentionally go out of your way to speak, down about yourself. But it's more that if it comes up, and the idea being that people, conversation comes up, and we tend to just give answers without being asked. Like maybe people are talking and you're like, well, did you know that I do this so and so? And the point is that you weren't even, you weren't asked about that. So why are you going talking about it? So the idea being that when you're not asked, you should, if anything, you should just be saying, oh, that's so, I'm still working on that. You should downplay it. So you don't, when people aren't asking you directly, you don't kind of take the opportunity to praise yourself. That's the idea. It's not about like just randomly disparaging yourself to others. That would be, a little bit strange. So, yeah. I hope that that's helpful. And if not, you can also follow up, Richard. Not sure if I understood the circumstance. Okay, we have a question from Victoria. It says, can you share a story about how you've personally seen meditation drastically change someone's life for the better? Personally seen meditation change someone's life for the better. I mean, I would say maybe, I guess, I became a monk, so that's a pretty drastic change, right? And I would say it's for the better. In my opinion, it's better to be a monk. So, obviously, now we're following on the question about speaking about yourself. So I'm not trying to say that I'm better, but rather that, I would say that, yeah, that changed my life for the better. Actually, I made some unwise choices when I was younger, and I'm glad, now I'm committed to a life of virtue, and and so on. So a life of peace and of developing wisdom. And so, being a monk is a good thing. It's good to be a monk. And of course, the Buddha says, if just putting on a robe made you enlightened, and as soon as a baby was born, you'd wrap them up in the orange robe, right? So that is, it's not that becoming a monk, then all of a sudden you're wonderful. That's not how it is. But rather, I feel that, yes, partially because of meditation. It wasn't just meditation, of course. There's other, but partially meditation. That's one of the ways I found Buddhism, was through meditation. And I would say that changed my life, for the better. So that would be an example. In terms of other people, it's hard to say, because often when we meet people, they already have been meditating for some time. Or at least, we don't often meet people. People don't tend to come to the monastery if they're, going out in their biker gang selling meth and, in a local, violent gang shootout or something. They don't tend to be at the monastery. So usually the people who have changed, they already have changed. But I definitely have heard there are many cases, many cases, like too many to, even detail, of people who start meditating because they get over things like anxiety, things like depression, things like maybe suicidal thoughts, things like, existential angst. So definitely that's very, very common. Like people can be totally changed, going from like an anxious wreck, depressed wreck, to actually happy, peaceful, and wise, and calm, and meaningful life, and so on. Like really drastic change. Like totally, their whole life is reoriented. That's very common, like really common. So because the thing is, it's not just meditation, right? Because it's your whole thing. You meditate, yes, that's part of it, but also you are training your mind through your virtue and through the paths. And so people who practice meditation, usually eventually they realize that their mind is not just there when they're on the cushion. It's always there. I know one senior monk who, she told me that she started out in the early days in the US when Zen was popular. And they didn't really talk about the precepts. So, but she realized kind of on her own, just meditating, like, things like drinking alcohol, it didn't really make any sense for a meditator. It just doesn't make sense. You learn that it's unwholesome, and you learn that it's not good. It doesn't, it's the opposite of good, right? So a lot of people, they start to naturally, meditation brings them into the root of the path of Buddhism. And then from there, that really changes their life, just sila, virtue, dana, generosity, bhavana, meditation and cultivation, all the things, the whole path, it can be life-changing for many, many people. So it's hard to think of a specific case right now, but yeah. I don't know if there's something more specific though, Victoria, then maybe I could address that. And hello to Tora. Okay, and Mariah says, She was trying to keep the 8 precepts long term, but after day 8, struggled to eat enough at your meal. This led to a lot of dizziness and tiredness in the evening, but also insomnia. So you ended up eating in the evening on the 11th day and got a good night's sleep. So you're back to keeping the 8 precepts again. How can you adjust to lower food intake so you can stay consistent? Great. Yeah, Mariah, I know you've asked many questions about the 8 precepts. So I'm, really rejoicing in your practice. You're trying to develop restraint, trying to develop virtue and train your mind further. So that's really wonderful. And the 8 precepts, they can be difficult. And so for those who don't know, what are the 8 precepts? Well, they are the typical 5 precepts, right? The Panchasila, so the 5 precepts. But they change. So they also include celibacy, and also the other 3 become renunciant precepts. So being not listening to music and going to see shows and entertainment. So things like, music, and nowadays you have movies available in your home even, right? So not doing things like that, dancing and singing. And then not adorning yourself with makeup and jewelry and a kind of beautiful, beautifying adornments, right? The idea being that you're renouncing that focus there. And similar adornments, basically things that perfume and adorn the body. And then finally, the last one being not to sleep on a high and luxurious bed, right? To just sleep in a simple place. So not sleeping on luxurious bedding, right? So what is the, for those who don't know, of course, Mariah is familiar because she's been following them. But these are additional, they're training you to be more renunciant, right? And you might think that sounds horrible. That sounds like suffering. You just listed up a bunch of reasons why I would be suffering. But actually, for those who practice, those are actually a source of happiness, right? Because you can find a new happiness, which doesn't require the addicting, defiling pleasures of sense stimulation. And so it can give you a lot of peace, a lot of happiness, a lot of freedom. And so they're beautiful, really beautiful practice. And the Buddha recommended following those at least twice a month. So what are called the Uposatha day. Uposatha is the full moon and the new moon. And if you're especially diligent, you can also follow them on the lunar quarters, on the half moon, each of the half moons. So once a week. And if you can't follow it on the moons, you can follow it like on a Sunday, on a weekend maybe, right? So in terms of then eating, so you say that you got dizzy and so on. So yeah, one thing to keep in mind, Brian, is that the Buddha, part of why he allowed tonics, why he allowed particular foods in the evening, is precisely because sometimes you need to get more calories, but you didn't get them in the morning. So you can, for example, make some, if you have like butter or ghee, and you make like a tea or something, make a tea, an herbal tea with maybe some honey and some ghee. And, or even you can have like some fruit juice, right? So the idea being that then you're going to get some calories. So you're going to get some sugar, you're going to get some fat, you're going to get some liquids. So it's going to fill your stomach up a little bit, and it's going to give you some calories. But you can't live on butter and ghee and honey. It's not what the Buddha calls substantial food. Meaning that, if you just try to eat your meal as ghee and honey, it's not going to go well, for very long. So of course you can eat those, but the point being that it's not really going to be sustainable just to have that. Versus if the Buddha allows like mashed potatoes and gravy and, red meat and broccoli, then yes, you could eat that as dinner. You could eat that to sustain your body. So the idea being that there are certain things like fruit juices and a list of other medicinal tonics, which the Buddha allowed in order to allow monks who are kind of sick, they don't have enough calories, or, just not feeling well from the hunger or whatever, then you can take those. So if possible, I would recommend that, if possible, because it can be helpful to just remember, like, when you're doing this practice, sometimes it might feel lonely, right? Because you might be the only one doing it. And so then it's very easy to get discouraged and want to eat and want to, sit down on the couch and watch some Netflix and eat some popcorn and French fries or whatever. Not that that's what you were doing, but just remember, actually, Buddhist monks and lay people a lot of them are following this. And sometimes, you go without food. So like, it's very common, like many monks, thousands, every day they are doing that practice. And so you feel a little dizzy, it's normal. Sometimes it happens. So you can just don't feel alone, and that can help encourage you. Like you're part of, this is a practice that is part of a community. It's not something that you're doing on your own. So sometimes you have symptoms like that. And part of the benefit of the 8 precepts is you get to experience hunger. So many people in like a Western society with lots of rich, just normal wealth, like even people who aren't wealthy, but the society is wealthy, it's sometimes rare to even experience hunger, right? Some people go days without eating like much food at all. And so when you're on the 8 precepts, you get to see like, wow, it is uncomfortable to be hungry, and that's what it feels like. That's just one day, one evening, basically half a day. So part of it is, this is dukkha. So, you've been born in a relatively fortunate place where you have access most of the time to food in the evening if you wanted it. Many people don't. They don't even have access to enough food the first time. So you're learning, this is suffering. You are fortunate enough not to experience that type of suffering so much this time around, but it's part of reality. And so if we are always running from it, then we'll never, overcome it. We'll never understand it. So now this is, of course, if you are feeling sick, again, I want to stress, of course, the Buddha allowed tonics, and it's not a big deal, that you decided to eventually eat one day. But what's most important really with the 8 precepts is that you, unless it's like an emergency, if there's something really serious, okay. But what's most important is that you don't break them spontaneously. So if you're going to break them, you make an intentional decision, not on the same day, ideally. So otherwise you're building a habit of giving in. So instead it's like, let's say you're really struggling. And so you decide that tomorrow you're going to eat, but not that day. It's too late now. So you've made a vow, you're going to follow the 8 precepts. So once, you follow it, and then the next day you can eat. And by the time you get there, you might actually want to keep following them. So yeah, just keep that in mind, to the best of your ability, try not to break them spontaneously. It's best to break them with intention. And then just use this as a learning experience. So, next time, try to do your best to get enough nutrition in the morning, or try to do your best to learn what is helpful and supportive of your body. And the other thing is, if you're working, if you're very busy, I don't know, then just see, is it a good idea to follow the 8 precepts? At least, is it a good idea to follow the food precept, right? Because if you're doing like a lot of work and you're very busy and using a lot of calories, then it might not, maybe the dizziness is a symptom that it's not really sustainable for you to not have enough calories, right? So like if you are, of course, I don't think you are, but imagine you have like a construction worker working 12 hours a day and they eat like a bowl of rice in the morning. Yeah, it's not going to go well, right? So just be mindful of that. And also the thing is, even if you work on the computer or something, I remember learning that I think professional chess players burn through like as many calories as like an Olympic athlete or something, because the brain takes so many calories to do that kind of playing. So if you're doing like a complicated computer job, it might be burning a lot of calories. I'm not sure. So yeah, just consider that. So yeah, and yeah, you say that helpful with the community. So yeah, keep reflecting. This is a common thing. This is for thousands of years. People have been doing this, and people are still doing it. And so you're not alone in that. And yeah, just do your best to learn from these types of things. Okay, and then Dempson says, is there a moral obligation in Buddhist doctrine to fight injustice? Moral obligation is not really a Buddhist concept. The Buddha is more saying, if you want to suffer, well, then you can, these are the causes of suffering. So, if someone wants to be born in hell, well, the Buddha gives you all the instructions to do that. If you want to suffer in this life and be miserable and everyone hate you, then, depressed and anxious and so on, then there are recipes to do that. Not recommended, right? So if you want to be happy, then there are recipes to do that. So there is no obligation. It's more just, it's a natural instinct. Whatever your philosophical beliefs and opinions are, the reality is the way you behave is that you want to be happy. It doesn't matter what you think. So, I bet if we put you in a torture chamber, you're not going to want to be in there, right? We don't give you food for a week, you're going to want to eat. Everyone hates you and you have a low self-esteem, we make you depressed and anxious, you're going to want to feel better. It's not going to feel good. So whatever your philosophical beliefs are, you want to be happy. So the Buddha is just saying, this is how you do that. You're not obligated. It's just that this is what you want. This is why you would do anything else. So like, why would someone not follow the precepts? Because they want to be happy. They think that by indulging in their impulses that they're going to be happy. So the Buddha is simply pointing out that is delusional. That's wrong. Here's the real way to do it, right? So there's no obligation, but I mean, in a way, either you're acting out of ignorance or you're acting out of wisdom. And any kind of immoral behavior is de facto, necessarily, undeniably, every single time out of ignorance, out of delusion, out of misunderstanding. So there's not an obligation, but there is in a way, it's kind of sort of just baked into the way the world works, you could say. So then in terms of fighting injustice, though, I mean, yes, our hearts are unjust. So anger is unjust. Anger is not just. Greed is unjust. Delusion is unjust. Selfishness is unjust. So those are injustices. So we tend to think like, oh, no one's watching, so I'll just go to the fridge and get a snack. Well, you are the cause of injustice. You should be ashamed of yourself. So you fight that injustice. You say, no. What does greed create? All the wars, all the killing, stealing, raping, lying, and drinking, it comes from greed. It comes from anger, and it comes from delusion. It doesn't come from anywhere else. So you just ask yourself, do you want to be on that list? Do you want to be the cause of injustice? Then if not, you have an obligation to fight it. And it starts right here. So if you have a mind, if you have arms, if you have a tongue, then it's time to purify your body, purify your speech, and purify your mind. And you are fighting injustice. And so, yeah. Okay, Mariah says, do you think there's a connection between thinking one is better than others and easily getting annoyed at others? I find myself easily annoyed at others and suspect it is rooted in conceit. I do think there is a connection. I think this was addressed recently, actually, that often the irritation or anger can come from a sense of like, you're too good for this type of thing, right? Like, oh, these, whatever it is, whether it's people or a scenario, like you are better than that. And so it's just it's annoying you, right? It's like, it's bothering your holiness. So your holiness is just, being disturbed by these peasants. So that can be in the mind. Yeah. Often annoyance. It comes from a sense of self and a sense of, basically we get fixated on our self perspective. So any kind of irritation, any kind of anger or aversion, it comes from the mind being fixated on a concept of itself. Like, I should say a concept of a kind of an ego type of thing, right? Although that word is a little bit overused. Basically thinking like, I don't like this. Well, it's not about you. So any kind of irritation with others is saying, I don't like it. So yes, it is selfish, inherently selfish. It's, who asked? So this kind of aversion, this kind of irritation of the mind kind of complaining about things, it does inherently come from the belief of me and my desires and my preferences and who I am and what I deserve and what I don't deserve. But it can be exacerbated, it can be made worse with a strong sense of pride, like a strong sense of conceit. Because then you have a very strong sense of, I like this, I don't like this. I want this, I don't want that. I deserve this, I don't deserve that. So that's very strong. So then you're giving, basically it justifies aversion, right? So aversion is always selfish, but when we have a strong sense of pride and then kind of more conventional sense of selfishness, then we justify it. And it's like, I deserve to be upset because I'm better than this. So that justifies the aversion. It justifies the sense of self not liking things. And so yeah, it definitely is connected. And one of the antidotes to that, I think, is really just developing compassion, because through compassion, you are stepping out of your own limited perspective. right? And you're seeing like, it's not about what I like and don't like, but what about what these other people are experiencing? So like, someone else is annoying you, and you develop compassion, and you realize that the whole time you were annoyed, it was basically just like a narrow-minded, selfish disliking of, it's bothering you. But then you realize actually they have a whole other life. They have a whole perspective, a whole background, a lot of suffering, a lot of dukkha that they're acting out of, and so on, or a lot of dukkha that they're just experiencing. And so sometimes we can even get annoyed at just completely innocent people, just bothered by, oh, you're inconveniencing me. That's just, when you have compassion, then you realize, no, it's not about me. Wow, this person needs, they deserve compassion. And the same when people annoy us with their behaviors and so on. So yeah, developing compassion is an antidote for stepping out of that self-minded, self-centered disliking of others, the kind of irritation. And instead opening up your perspective and realizing, wow, the world is much more broad. And that can be very helpful. And Harry says he took the advice about going to a temple. Sadhu, Harry, I hope it goes well for you. And I hope that you flourish and find community and help support your practice. Okay, and Hasa Compagna says, what is a practical way of practicing yoniso manasikara consistently within and outside of formal meditation? Okay, so for those who don't know, what is yoniso manasikara? Yoniso manasikara means careful application of mind, or wise application of mind, thorough application of mind. So it's the mind which is kind of investigating deeply into an issue and looking at the source of the issue, right? So, for example, the Buddha says that imagine there's a lump of foam floating down the river, and at first glance it looks solid, but you inspect it yoniso, so you inspect it with this kind of thorough, deep consideration, and you see that it's actually bubbles. It's not actually substantial. It's actually very fleeting and ephemeral and so on. So manasikara is applying your mind. So it's applying your mind in order to understand things properly. It's applying your mind with wisdom, applying your mind with the right view, right? Applying your mind with the going in the direction towards nibbana, going in the direction towards wholesomeness. So it's the way that we apply our mind. And so the Buddha says that whenever we have things like hindrances, so whenever we have things like sensual desire, or if we have things like anger, irritation, or restlessness, even sleepiness, dullness, then the Buddha says, what is the cause of that? It is ayoniso manasikara. So application of mind which is not yoniso, which is not wise. So, for example, anger, just giving people kind of example of this, is that anger, the Buddha says, why does anger arise? It's because of ayoniso manasikara, so unwise or not proper, not careful, not wise application of mind to the fault, to the resistant thing. So like, for example, say you are experiencing someone or something that you find difficult. You find it like it has the bad aspect, the negative part. So why do you get angry? Because you focus your mind irrationally. You focus your mind unwisely on the part that you find annoying. So that makes you angry. And so the Buddha says, that's because you're getting angry because you're applying your mind in the wrong way. So your mind is looking, kind of digging around where it shouldn't be, right? And it's causing anger. So the way that we apply our mind, it matters, and it affects our mind states. Okay, so then how to practice, how to practice yoniso manasikara consistently within and outside of formal meditation? Well, I think one thing that comes to mind, immediately is that in a way that's what the factor of right effort is in the Noble Eightfold Path. So in the Noble Eightfold Path, the Buddha, one of the sixth factor is right effort, right? Samma vayama. So the practice that you do to purify your mind so that wholesome dhammas, wholesome qualities arise and persist and grow. And so that unwholesome, bad dhammas, bad qualities do not arise, and when they are arisen, they go away. And so yoniso manasikara is really that application of mind which is learning, well, how do they arise? How do they not arise? How do I prevent them from arising? How do I make them grow? When the Buddha defines and talks about yoniso manasikara, he's often, one of the examples I gave, which he gives, is the hindrances and the awakening factors, which is an example of right effort, right? Developing the awakening factors and removing the hindrances, growing the awakening factors and preventing the hindrances. So that's one of the Buddha's examples of yoniso manasikara. And so if you're applying right effort, if you're bringing right effort into your life, and you say within and outside of formal meditation, and right effort is, of course, within and outside formal meditation, then you should be using yoniso manasikara. So that means that every waking second, we should be observing our mind, right? We should be looking. Venerable Sariputta once said, also the Buddha actually said, if you can't read other people's minds, then you should read your own mind. Can you read your own mind? Many people can't. So you read your own mind and you see what is going on in here, and you look into it, and you don't tolerate bad, unwholesome things. And so, but this has to come with wisdom, right? If we just think like we try to grit our teeth and then it won't work. You have to use your wisdom power, not your willpower, right? You have to use your wisdom. You have to use your investigation. And so you have to see, like, why does this arise? Why does it grow? How does it not arise? How does it go away? That is yoniso manasikara, right? That is the investigating, seeing what is the cause. What is the way my mind is relating to the world? So, for example, in formal meditation, the way that this works is we don't want to meditate, as the Buddha says, like a donkey, right? How does a donkey meditate? It sees hay and it thinks, hay, hay, hay. It just wants to eat the hay, right? It just wants to eat the straw. So that's like a donkey. So you sit down and meditate, you think, breath, breath. Meditation is hard. That's because you're meditating like a donkey. So you don't want to meditate like that, right? So instead, you want to meditate like a wise donkey. What does the wise donkey do? Not the silly donkey. The wise donkey thinks, when I do these things, when I listen to my master, then I do certain things, they give me treats. And when I don't listen, they don't give me treats. And the donkey learns, it investigates, like, wait a minute. Don't just think, hey, hey, hey. Think, like, why is there hay right now? Right? Because, so from the perspective of the donkey, it just focuses on, like, oh, there's hay. Yes, hay. I want hay. And the wise donkey says, like, wait a minute. There's not always hay. So why is there hay right now? It's because of its behavior. So the donkey will start to realize, like, oh, sometimes I get fed. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I get fed more. Sometimes I get fed less. So the donkey isn't just fixated on the thing in front of it, but it starts investigating, like, why is the thing there in the first place, right? So we want to be like the smart donkeys. So when you have hay come up, so whether it's, really yummy, juicy hay, like loving kindness, peace, contentment, you don't just think, yes, good, and then it goes away, and you're like, oh, there's a reason. There's a reason that your mind gets peaceful. There's a reason it doesn't. And then when you don't, you get the really stinky bad hay, you get angry and your meditation is not going well. And so you don't just, lament. You think, well, why is the bad hay here? Right? There's a reason. So that is yoniso manasikara. It's investigating, right? And it's right effort. That is right effort. So you investigate. And one thing to say, is we investigate when something has arisen. We don't really need to see the details of that thing per se, but rather, why is the thing here, right? Again, so like the hay, we don't need to fix it on the hay. We need to reason, like, why is the hay there? So in the same way, let's say you have a story come up. You don't need to get lost in the story. That would actually not really be yoniso manasikara. That would be getting lost in the details of the story. But you instead say, like, why is my mind picking this up? And that is investigating. That is using your wisdom to see, I'm focusing on certain things. My mind is inclining towards focusing in certain ways, and that gets entangled in particular stories and particular unwholesome states and anger and greed and, maybe guilt or self kind of flagellating or feeling sorry for ourselves or anxiety or worries or whatever it might be, right? So all the bad things. And so you use yoniso manasikara, you investigate that. So we should always be doing that. We should always be applying right effort, meaning always looking, like, how is my mind right now? And why is it not better? And why is it not worse? Right? So not getting restless, because that would also be ayoniso manasikara, right? So if I tell you to do this and you start thinking, oh no, oh, so now you're applying your mind unwisely to right effort, right? So instead, right effort should be you investigate to work with your mind. You start to learn how to speak the language of your mind. And it doesn't speak normal language. It speaks special mind language. So you have to learn to read your mind. You have to learn to understand your mind like that. And yeah, so that's a constant practice. It really can't be stressed enough how, like, it doesn't matter what posture our body is in. It matters what we're doing with our mind. It's just, and I don't think that this, your question addresses this, but I think for other people, it's good to mention, like, it's not just when you cross your legs. That has nothing to do really with your mind. So your mind doesn't care whether your legs are crossed or whether you're relying on it, laxing on a couch. Your mind is always doing something. And so we're always training it. So why do we cross our legs? Just so that we can focus on our mind without being distracted, basically. To have a still mind so that we don't have to worry about our body moving around. That's about it. So there's really no other reason why we need to be sitting down. And so, yeah, right effort applies to sitting, standing, lying, and walking, and also any other disposition of the body, any other posture. So I hope that that's helpful. Okay, and then the next question from Etienne says, is there a sutta related to developing self-metta as a layperson, like Dipama? Well, the way to develop metta as a layperson would be the same as a monastic. It's the same for anyone with loving kindness. Can't really think of any reason why it wouldn't be. I don't know the story of Deepa Ma with this particular. I know of Deepa Ma, and I know a few vague stories about her, but I don't know the story of her developing self-metta specifically. But if you're just referring to the fact that she developed metta for herself, yes, that's a very common practice, and is taught, for example, in the Visuddhimagga, which Deepa Ma followed very closely. Her teacher followed very closely, if I remember correctly. So how do you do it? Well, metta meditation, loving kindness meditation, is simply the wish to be happy and to be safe. So not to be happy, like a ideal mother or an ideal guardian, an ideal friend. So whenever you feel loved, so you feel a feeling of like they care about me. They want me to be happy. When you're sad, they want you to be happy. When you're happy, they want you to be happy. They care about you. They wish, even when you're far away, they wish, may they be happy, may they be safe. I hope they're doing well. When you're near, oh, I hope you're doing well. So they wish them well. There's a feeling of caring. There's a feeling of well-wishing, of goodwill, of friendliness. And so you develop that towards yourself, right? Oh, may I be well. May I be happy. May I be at ease. May I be free of suffering. Oh, hello, little friend. Hello. Oh, may you be happy, right? So wishing yourself to be happy, like that. And you can use phrases. So you can repeat in your mind, may I be happy, may I be safe, may I be at ease, may I be well. And you try to say those phrases in your mind with intention, with a real sense of, may I be happy, And one way you can do that, if you have a hard time doing it, is you think of an animal or a person who you naturally want them to be happy very easily, right? Like some people, you think of them, you think, oh, may they be happy. I hope they're well. And you care about them and you want them to be happy and safe. And so feel, how does that feel? And you imagine yourself as just, you're another being, right? You're also like that person. So you try to direct it towards yourself neutrally, meaning that like, we're not special, we're just another being. So we also can say, may I be happy? And that's the basic idea, is just using things like phrases or memories to establish the feeling of wishing, of well-wishing, the feeling of friendliness, the feeling of loving care. And then you try to establish that intention directed towards yourself. And eventually you can even drop the phrases and you just focus on the well-wishing, on the heart of wanting yourself to be well and happy. So you can make it nonverbal, right? Just make it just focusing on the feeling, and you can expand it, kind of like when you're building a fire. So you start with a small, dry twigs, and you can put bigger twigs and bigger twigs and bigger twigs, and then logs, and eventually the boom, blazing fire. So your heart, you can give it a little bit of fuel, right? Use it some phrases, some memories, some images, get it going, right? Get the fire going. And then eventually you start to grow the fire of loving kindness, of friendliness, of goodwill, of metta, and you develop that towards yourself. And then you extend it towards others. So if you also have a hard time doing it for yourself, develop it for others, and then reflect that you are also like others. Those are just a few basic thoughts. Okay, and then Mike has a question. Mike says, what are some practical offerings I could give to the Buddha during morning and evening practice, aside from incense? And how do you dispose of them without burning? Unfortunately, some neighbors complained about the incense smell. Well, yeah, so some offerings you can leave on the altar is water. Actually, water is a common one. You can get a little glass or a jug of water, and you offer the water. Water can symbolize like purity and cleanliness and so on. So that's a pretty common one. And you can also offer flowers. So hopefully your neighbors wouldn't complain about that if they smell them. So you can offer flowers on the altar. And you can offer also like a little bit of food even. Like, for example, before you eat, it's common that you offer a little bit of the food. And you offer it with the intention of offering it to the Buddha, right? The idea being that you're cultivating a habit of offering before you eat, and of offering to the Buddhas, of offering to spiritual practitioners, of cultivating a mind of wanting to offer, wanting to respect the Buddha, gratitude and so on. So the Buddha says, monks, if sentient beings knew the benefits, the power of generosity like he does, they wouldn't eat even their last morsel of food without sharing some with someone else first. If they knew just how beneficial it was to practice generosity, if they knew like he does, if they had witnessed directly as the Buddha had, just how beneficial, like how good it is to give, how much good karma it creates, and how beneficial it is for you and others, then you wouldn't even just your last little bit, the only thing you had, you wouldn't eat it without giving it some to someone if there was someone there to receive it. So that's, you practice that when you offer food to the Buddha, to the altar. You might not have people there to receive the food, right? But you can think, but if the Buddha was here, I would offer this. I want to offer a little bit first before you eat. So things like a little bit of food, water, flowers, and also candles, light. So you can take a little tea candle, for example, or maybe a candle that's not very fragrant if your neighbors complain about it, and just do a simple candle, and you can light it. Right. So those are traditional offerings. And there's even verses common in Sri Lanka, like, for example, when offering flowers, then you reflect, just as these flowers will wither and fade, so too this body will perish. And when you offer lights, you think, oh, the Buddha was the lamp of the world. He was the light of wisdom, illuminating the three worlds, and so on. So they have meanings, right? Things like water, candles or lamps, and food and flowers. And then how do you dispose of them? I think that should be pretty clear how to dispose without burning. I don't think you wouldn't really burn water, and you wouldn't burn food or flowers, or I guess candles you would be burning. So maybe if you can't burn, then you don't need to use candles. But yeah, the food you can actually eat it yourself later on if you'd like, or you can offer it to your local animal population if it's just a little bit, So yeah, those are some thoughts. Okay. And hello, Nok Noi. And Nok Noi has a question, but it's a little bit later down. So Richard says, the times when I feel naturally inclined to meditate on metta is not when I'm angry, but when I am afraid, and it works. But what can I meditate on when I am angry apart from metta? Yeah, so metta, loving kindness, is the direct antidote to anger, right? But often when we're angry, that's kind of the hardest time to develop loving kindness, right? Exactly for that reason. So metta is the antidote for anger, more for like people who have an inclination towards anger, not necessarily in the moment. because in the moment, it just might not be, it might be more skillful. Like it might actually be better to meditate on something else to get your mind away from focusing on the person at all. And then you develop loving kindness with a neutral mind. So if your mind is already angry, it's kind of too late. You need to just get rid of the anger. So yes, you can do metta reflections, but it might just actually be helpful just to not even think about trying to develop that loving kindness at that time, because the mind is just agitated. So it's kind of like maybe when someone is like very hungry or something, then or maybe like you're training an animal and it's very, very hungry and you want to get it to do tricks or train it with food. You might need to eat first if it's just very hungry. So it's kind of a bad example, but the idea being that if our mind is already very weak, then yes, we need to train it with loving kindness, but it might need a little bit of nourishment first. It might need to kind of get back up on a neutral state. So something just drop the story, just come back to your body, just come back to your breath, or just practice generosity and saying nice things to them, being nice to them. So change your behavior, change your attitudes with anger. Because one thing that's also important to keep in mind is that many people, they understand that when your mind is angry, then your body and your speech are going to tend to be bad. But what's often neglected, which is very important, central to Buddhism, is that if your body and speech are kind, then you teach your mind to be kind as well. So if you have anger towards someone, treat them nicely, give them gifts, be kind to them, think of the good qualities that they have. Don't let your mind incline towards thinking of the bad qualities. Praise them to others, praise their good qualities to others. So start acting in a different way, and that will help change your anger, because you'll start just relating in a different way. Your behavior will change, so your mind will change. So yeah, when you're angry, you can do any kind of other practice if metta is not easy for you, or you can do reflections. Sometimes it's helpful to reflect when we're angry on compassion, as I mentioned before, right? Reflecting that I'm angry about this, but actually they have their own circumstances, they have their own suffering, and they're acting out of their suffering, or they're experiencing suffering, so I should have compassion for them. So compassion, reflections on compassion can be helpful. Like actually,
so can we recollect Buddha?
Yeah, I mean, if you're angry, you can recollect the Buddha. Yeah, it can be helpful. Yeah, so recollecting the Buddha can be helpful. I mean, if you have faith in the Buddha and so on. Yeah, one of the things that's from Christianity, which is actually true of Buddhism as well, is somewhere in the New Testament. I can't remember if it's in Mark, or I can't remember exactly where it is, but there's a scene where Jesus is crucified, right? So he's been crucified on the cross. He's been killed, he's being killed, he's being tortured. And he says, like, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So the idea being like, they don't understand that actually this is a bad thing to do. So please forgive them, like, oh, they don't understand all the suffering that they're creating for themselves. So please forgive them, have mercy on them. They know not what they do. So actually that's very Buddhist. The idea being that whenever people do bad things, unskillful things, actually it's because they know not what they do. They don't understand that they're creating suffering for themselves. So you have compassion, like, oh man, that's really bad. They're really suffering in the moment, because people only do bad things out of suffering. Their mind is bothering them, their life is bothering them, and it creates even more suffering. So just imagine like someone who is raised in a bad neighborhood, bad parents, bad friends, bad family, then they start doing bad things, and it's just horrible. Like there's no point to be angry. And actually everyone is like that. Everyone who does bad things, they have like a little version of the bad neighborhood type of thing. So we have compassion, like, wow, that's really sad. We should have compassion. We should wish, may they be free of that. May they be free of suffering. And try to help them, So, yeah, so compassion can be helpful sometimes instead of metta. And yeah, any other recollection, any other meditation, recollecting Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, anything that helps you get back to taking refuge, not in your defilements, but in your practice. Finding safety, not in anger, not in your attachments, but in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, in the practice, in a calm mind. Anything that helps you get back to that. Okay, and so let's see here. Julie says, what is the skillful way of handling a parent who blames one for their suffering? Even though it is clear there is ignorance, it feels strange to continue to call to get hated on. Okay. Even wished ill for me by my surroundings feels very bad and difficult to shake off because it's escalating despite my compassion and setting limits with love and kindness. Yeah, Julie, I'm sorry to hear that, and that sounds, difficult and a hard situation. You parents blaming for their suffering, and even though you try to develop compassion and so on, they just don't really listen, and they wish harm for you and are angry and so on. So one thing to keep in mind is that you're doing a good thing, right? So like not getting it might be easy to feel discouraged, like, well, this isn't working, like I'm being compassionate and they're not responding. But remember, it's good to remember that when we do good deeds, when we do compassion, our mind should not be expecting anything in return, right? Otherwise, it's not a gift, it's an exchange. So it's like, I'll trade you, I'll give you some compassion and you treat me nicely. Well, that's you're trading, right? So, of course, I don't say this to be disparaging towards you. I know it's only natural. I'm just saying it that's a reflection that can be helpful. That sometimes we remember, like, actually, I'm already doing a good thing just by being compassionate. I don't need to expect them to respond any better. You just reflect, like, you know what? No matter how they respond, you're doing a good thing. You're doing the right thing. You're doing what you should be doing. And they might not respond in a good way. They might not give you, there might not even be a moment of appreciation. There might not be even a moment of gratitude. They might just get even more angry, even more resentful. And so you just reflect, like, it can be helpful to remember, no matter what they do, you're doing the right thing. And the Buddha says, there's a sutta where he goes through a long list where he says, others will be angry. We will not be angry. So we will train not to get angry. Others will be resentful. We will train not to be resentful. It's a training. So, like, she will, or they, I shouldn't say she, I don't know who it is. They will, whoever the parent is, they will act how they are. You will not. So they will be resentful. They will be hateful. You will not be. You'll be compassionate. And so you remember, like, that's really, you're doing all the best thing. It's really wonderful. And that can actually then ease the expectation, because when you feel, one, that you are doing the right thing, and two, that you can't expect them to reciprocate, then a lot of the suffering will just go away, right? Because you'll feel just a sense of ease, a sense of self-confidence, a sense of, like, power, and, like, not in a bad way, but power in a sense of, like, you can be kind and you don't need to have any sense of you don't have to be like a victim of this person. You can be kind to them. You can be compassionate. You can be loving, and no matter what, they won't bother you. So it's like, usually when people abuse us, when they insult us, they do it to kind of make us their victims, right? In a sense, they want to feel better about themselves or whatever the reasons are. And so you can feel a sense of, like, you're above all that, in a healthy way, not in a distant or prideful way, but in a healthy way of, like, a sense of safety. And it doesn't drain you to be compassionate. Often this can be draining, right? It's draining to be compassionate, and then the people don't respond. But if you reflect in that way, like, you're doing all you can and you can't expect them to behave differently, you won't feel drained. You'll actually feel more invigorated. So that can be, one helpful thing. And of course, it might not always be easy. Sometimes you might fall back into thinking, like, yeah, but I wish that they would just, show a moment's appreciation. And yeah, that's natural. It's natural to think that way. And you just remember, like, but they might not. And what am I going to do? Am I going to not be compassionate? That wouldn't be the right answer, right? So not exactly, the same. It's not on the same level of intensity. So I don't want to make a direct comparison. But recently being in Italy with another monk's mother, demented mother, and she can be very unappreciative, very angry, very selfish, and so on. and you're actually doing a lot of helping. Like I remember sometimes we'd be spending hours, giving her company and so on, and she would just be blasting with, anger and insults and, you're the worst person alive, basically, type of thing. And it's like, well, she's suffering. So in that case, the person had dementia and, was suffering. And so it's like, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to get angry? That's obviously that doesn't help. So it's kind of the same, everyone who is acting out of anger in this way, the only response is compassion. The only response is accepting that our compassion doesn't necessarily reciprocate. So although, yes, it's true that often loving kindness and compassion, they do lead to reciprocation, it's not a universal thing. So that's actually not what the Buddha is promising. He's not promising like be kind to people and then they'll treat you nicely. That's not it, right? So then you just remember that. Like remember, oh yeah, it's harder than than we hope. It's like, oh yeah, it's true. Although sometimes, often loving kindness does help. Actually, it's not guaranteed. Actually, that's not the main benefit. The main benefit is that you are no longer, you can be above the suffering and you can help them better. So yeah, those are a few thoughts on that. The other thing, of course, is, if you do need to set limits, more strict limits, then that might be what you need to do. And you might need to tell the person just upright. And remember that that's not lacking love. It's not lacking kindness to say, you're treating me poorly. You're acting unskillfully without anger, by just saying, you can just tell them, I'm sorry, but I can't talk to you when you're like this because you're acting in an unskillful, harmful way. You're saying hurtful things, and I'm concerned that it's bad for you, and I'm concerned it's bad for me. And you just tell them, and some people, they might be shocked to hear that, like, wow, this is a bad thing what you're doing. And it's like, yeah, it is. So that can be shocking to hear from someone who, if they're used to bullying the child, right, then they hear, actually, you're being unskillful. Actually, I don't think it's good that we talk very much. But you don't say it with a heart of like resentment and anger. That's the key. So before you do that, it might be good to really meditate on some loving kindness and compassion and really try to establish your mind in like, you're going to say this to them to better the relationship, even if that means the relationship being less frequent, right? You're going to say this to benefit yourself and them, not to fight back, not to get angry. So you try to really establish that in your mind before you do something like that. But it's totally fine. That is very acceptable. The Buddha said that there are two people who are blameworthy. Someone who blames a person who is praiseworthy, and someone who doesn't blame a person who is blameworthy. So, if you are just letting them walk all over you and saying that is loving kindness, not necessarily, right? You might have good intentions, and that, you might be acting out of loving kindness, but it can also be loving kindness to tell them up front and just say directly though, that this is unskillful. And you can even think, imagine some of the suttas where the Buddha admonishes the monks, right? And he says, that was really foolish and stupid of you. You are, basically saying, that is really stupid. And, it's not that the Buddha doesn't have compassion. He does it out of compassion, right? So there's one place where, for example, a monk says, they have wrong view, and they're saying and they're declaring after other people correct them, they stick obstinately and they say, they hold to a wrong view, basically. And the Buddha hears about this and he calls them and he questions them, and he doesn't say, oh, I really understand where you're coming from. It's so natural to think that. No, he says, you vain man, you foolish man, whoever taught you that I was saying that? You have created much demerit for yourself, much suffering. And so what is he saying? It's kind of like, not good, right? If the Buddha says, oh, it's okay, little buddy, it's okay, Mr. Monk, you can, it's not a big deal. It is a big deal. He created a lot of, misunderstanding. So someone might be stuck in samsara because of his misunderstandings. Just imagine that. Like, imagine that you were teaching people wrong, and because of that, they didn't attain liberation, and now they're in hell. So that's horrible because of your, you as in the person, right? Their misunderstanding because of their teaching poorly. So, that's unfortunate. So the Buddha is saying, like, it's really bad what you're doing. Immediately, you need to stop. You haven't understood, a little bit. So sometimes, you don't need to say, like, you foolish person, you vain person, you've created much demerit for yourself. You don't need to say that, necessarily, but you might say, with compassion, that it's not skillful and that you don't feel that it's healthy, that you don't feel you can talk to them. And that might make them also reconsider, like, maybe I should treat them nicer, right? So those are a few thoughts, those just a few reflections on that. And I wish you all the best, Julie, and I keep practicing. And if there's anything more specific or more, that you feel could be clarified, feel free to ask. Okay, and then Noknoi says, Sadhu Noknoi. Noknoi was recently here. She was a resident. Venerable Xinghui says hello. Says, Anumodana Sadhu, the teaching. I learned and understand how important to find peace and inside and not going to not be disturbed from outside. Thank you for teaching. I try to work on that to get benefit from meditation. Sadhu Noknoi, hope you're doing well, and I hope that you're finding peace and so on. Hope your meditation is going well, and I hope that your family is well. So wishing you the best. Okay. And then Victoria has a question related to parents as well. Says, let's see here. Can you recommend a practice to help with staying focused on my spiritual practice when staying at a monastery long term, while I have a close connection to emotionally helping a parent in need? It's not an extreme emotional difficulty, but I feel somewhat guilty for leaving her for a few months. For not being around her for a few months, even though the difficulty isn't your fault. Yeah, okay, so good question. Of course, natural that you feel a sense of maybe guilt, a sense of obligation to be helping this person, but you are instead going off on your own. So I remember hearing from a monk who spends a lot of time in Thailand, very Thai, basically became Thai, though not Thai, even advises the king and so on. And this monk was saying that apparently, I don't know, I've never been to Thailand, but apparently in Thailand, there's a common thing where if someone has some vacation time and they say like, oh, they're going to go to Singapore to do some shopping, or they're going to go, to, whatever, like some kind of country, and they're going to go to the south, go to the beach and have a vacation, or go abroad and do some shopping, then people, they understand that, like, oh, that's wonderful, nice vacation. And if the person says, oh, I'm going to go on vacation, I think I'm going to go to the monastery and, focus on my practice, do some meditation, then people will often say, oh, that's very selfish of you, right? Almost like it's not selfish to go shopping in Singapore or whatever, but it is, to go to the monastery. So sometimes we can be like that, we can feel like, oh, it's very selfish of me to be going off and to this monastery, and, I should be taking care. And of course, you might know, like on the surface of your mind, you might know intellectually, it's not selfish per se, and that you do actually care about them, and you don't want them to suffer, and you want to be able to help them, but you also feel it's important to, you have all the reasons and so on. So I'm sure you've gone through that, but it can still feel, you can still feel guilty. It can still feel like that. And one thing to keep in mind is, is the guilt justified? So is it really not appropriate, for example, to be away? I assume that probably not if you've evaluated it, but that can be something to help. And even if you have evaluated it, it can be helpful to go over that. So the story kind of running on autopilot, like you're feeling guilty, and just kind of check, like, well, wait a minute, is this justified? And honestly ask yourself that question. Be prepared to receive the answer that you shouldn't be at the monastery, right? That it is selfish. So if that's if you really are honest with yourself about that, then if you do get the answer back honestly that no, it's not, you shouldn't be guilty, it's not selfish, that this is okay, then that should help you, because then you realize that the story is unjustified. The story is running on a kind of autopilot. So often in the mind, what will happen is we will have like this sort of bubbling up of sort of emotions and stories, which we kind of, we know that they're not really true, but they bother us, and we have a compulsion to believe them. So like whether it's some kind of anxiety or some kind of remorse or some kind of guilt, there's often like a bubbling in the mind of like, what about this? What about that? What about this? Aren't you worried about that? And we let it sort of bully, we let the mind, we kind of believe it. And it's important to sometimes reflect in those moments that things like remorse, guilt, and anxiety, they come because the mind just wants to be happy. It's trying to protect you. So it's like it's just trying to protect you. And it's just a little bit diluted. It's just a little bit misunderstanding. That can be really helpful because you think like maybe you're feeling very guilty. You think, I'm really worried about this, but my mind, it just wants to help my mom. It just wants to help my parent. It just wants me to be a good person. So like it feels very bad. Like sometimes it can be a really strong battle with these kinds of emotions. You just remember like, oh, this is just my mind trying to help me. It just doesn't understand. It's believing a story which is going unquestioned. It's kind of bubbling up from the unconscious and it needs to be questioned further. So sometimes you just need to have that sense of kindness towards your mind. Like, oh, guilt, anxiety, remorse, they come because my mind, it really just wants me to be good. It doesn't want to do bad things. So that's wonderful. It's wonderful that you have a sense of care and respect for your parents. It's wonderful that you want to take care of them, right? It's wonderful that you don't want to be selfish. Those are wonderful qualities. It's not wonderful to feel guilty about it, right? So you can actually just understand like, oh, my mind has a lot of good things. Same with remorse. Maybe someone feels strong remorse even about going to the monastery, right? But any kind of remorse, it's like, it's wonderful that I have a sense of conscience. It's wonderful that I have a sense of right and wrong and that I don't want to do wrong. It's wonderful that I'm committed to doing good things. It's not wonderful to feel remorse, right? So it's wonderful that your mind wants to, help your mom and make you do good. So rejoice in that and set aside the story. It's almost like the mind is kind of crying. And what it's really saying is, I want to be good, be a good daughter or whatever. So you say, that's wonderful, mind, sadhu. And you don't listen to the kind of whining of the mind. That's just a symptom. It's a kind of misunderstanding coming from the mind. It's kind of getting confused a little bit about what it means to be a good daughter, right? So you think it's really nice that you want to be a good daughter, and you don't need to worry. You don't need to be guilty. So that kind of approach. And then the other thing is, again, like I said, investigating. So if you honestly investigate and see, is this story justified or not? And just, there should be a black and white answer. Well, sometimes it can be gray with things like taking care of parents. But it should be relatively clear, like for this time period, for this short time period, is it appropriate or not to leave? And just, you might need to go over that again and again. If there's a really strong tendency for the mind to be like, it's appropriate, yeah, but, and you come back, it's like, it's simple. The mind complicates it, but it's actually very straightforward. It's either appropriate or it's not, or maybe it's black and white, it's gray and you need to clarify it. So just investigate, like, what is the answer? Is it appropriate? Is this justified? Or is this guilt unjustified? So those are some reflections. Okay, Damson says, which one of the Nikayas, in your opinion, represents the most accurate and closest to what the Buddha has said and done? For those who don't know, the Nikayas are the collection in Pali of the suttas. You have the Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, Anguttara Nikaya, and Khuddaka Nikaya. So the collection of lengthy sayings, the collection of middle-length sayings, the connected or sayings by topic, the numerical sayings, and the miscellaneous sayings. And there's not really a which one is most accurate, because the Nikayas are organized, as you just noticed, not by like accuracy or chronology, right? So they're organized by the length of the discourse, or the number in the discourse, or the topic. So like, let's say that one, the Buddha is talking about, there's a long one. So that's going to go in the Digha Nikaya. Then there's one about, it uses the number, it uses a list of 6. That's going to go in the numerical one probably. So they're kind of dispersed evenly. So they're not really broken up in terms of like, oh, this one is from, like, this one's earlier, this one's later. There is a mixture of material in all 4/5 of them. That said, the Khuddaka Nikaya does contain many late books, which are recognized as late. So things like popular books that are in there, some of them are later, like the Upadhanas and so on. Those are not really from the time of the Buddha, by most people's, by most scholars, I should say, opinions. And it's possible that you might feel that they are from the time of the Buddha, but I would personally, if you ask my opinion, I would say, that those are not. So yeah, there are some things in the Khuddaka Nikaya. But the Khuddaka Nikaya is special. It's a collection of minor books. So like the Dhammapada, the Udana, the Tipitaka, etc. So it's not like a main collection. It's actually like a minor collection with many. It's a collection with many minor books in it, minor mini collections within it. So the four principal Nikayas, the Digha, the Majjhima, the Samyutta, and the Anguttara, they're all pretty much, principal stuff. And there is some late things in there, and there is early things in there, and they're all kind of mixed together. Okay. And Etienne says, on a different live chat, you recommended building sila. Are there sila practices? You say you focused on panya and samadhi and you become tired. Does sila lead to development in panya and samadhi? Well, yes, it does lead to development. And yes, there are practices. Sila actually means, one of the meanings is like a habit. So, so for those who don't know, what is sila? So sila means virtue, ethics, morality, integrity, and so on. Good habits, wholesome habits. So do you have a habit of killing? Right? When you see ants and cockroaches and flies and mosquitoes, do you have a habit of killing them? Does your mind incline towards killing? So the first sila practice would be incline your mind to have a new habit. Train it to incline towards non-killing. Even ideally towards non-harming. Even towards helping. Right? Do you have a habit of taking what really doesn't belong to you? Maybe the hot sauce containers at the restaurant. Maybe the utensils is concerning, so people are laughing. Like that's something that they know about. Maybe the utensils or the napkins. I told a story not so long ago that when I was on the plane recently, at a certain point on the plane, this young girl started having a panic attack. And she started, you have to tell them, you have to tell them. And I assume it was her mom. She was like, shh, calm down. Now's not the time to freak out. And the child was freaking out. And she was like, started screaming on the plane. And the mom was like, okay. And she said like, they've been taking the perfume bottles in the plane. And I thought, like, was that an admission? Like they just admitted? And I went to the bathroom and they had little perfumes and it was missing from the bathroom. So like the child probably had a panic attack that the mom had been stealing these things in the plane bathroom. So do you have a habit of taking what doesn't really belong to you? Right? Or maybe someone leaves something behind, you think that you'll keep it for yourself or something. So that would be unadvisable, right? Don't do that. So that is a practice of sila. So ideally you train in giving away what you have, give away, practice generosity. So if you have some extra, give it away, right? We talked about that. So instead of taking, how about giving? Do you have a habit of cheating on your partner? Don't do that. Do you have a habit of, and instead cultivate the opposite, right? So cultivate mutual respect and so on. Do you have a habit of lying? Don't do that. So you want to develop wisdom, you want to develop panya, you want to develop understanding of reality. But if your mind can't even face reality itself, if it's afraid of reality, it has to protect itself from reality, hide reality from others externally, it will not want to see reality internally. If you want to have a kind, happy mind, but you have an averse, angry, inclined to killing mind, your mind will not want to be, it will not be happy, peaceful, kind. If you want to have a content mind, but your mind isn't even content with what it has, then it will not be content. It will not be peaceful. It will not be happy where it's at. And if you want to have a mind free of desire, but your desire is so strong that you have a habit of cheating and acting on inappropriate urges, then it will not be free of desire. And finally, alcohol, the fifth precept for lay people that the Buddha recommends, refraining from alcohol and intoxicants. So you want to develop mindfulness. What's the opposite of mindfulness? You want to develop diligence. What's the opposite of diligence and heedfulness? You want to develop good friendships, wise friendships. What's the opposite of a good social environment? It's like a bar. It's alcohol. So alcohol, drinking, intoxicants, drugs that cause negligence, heedlessness, lack of inhibitions, and so on. Those are the opposite of Buddhism. They're the opposite of samadhi, and they're the opposite of panya. So actually, all of the precepts are the opposite of samadhi and panya. I should say all the things that you're not supposed to do, right? So that's an example. And then the Buddha, even further, you can even further refine your sila if you want to be extra good, right? Which you do. And that is, do you have a habit of speaking harshly, abusing people? Yeah, you look horrible today, right? Or, I hate that person. Or complaining or dividing people. Did you hear what so-and-so did? Oh, you should stop being friends with them. Did you hear how awful they are? Dividing people. So stopping that, stopping divisive speech, harsh speech, and also idle chatter. Did you hear about Kim Kardashian? Did you hear how her nails are looking? Did you hear about Johnny Cash, the new movie he starred in? Did you see the new food? Oh, it was so tasty, the sauce that they have at that restaurant down the street. So that is idle chatter, right? Inclining the mind. And then you sit and meditate and your mind is thinking and wandering and you wonder why. Well, it's not much to wonder about, is there? So yes. And then finally, there's also sila, even in the level of the mind, of trying to remove strong covetousness and strong ill will. So this would be like you see what your neighbors have and you think, I wish I had that. So, you start getting very, very jealous, very, very desirous of what other people have, and strong ill will, like wishing people harm, wishing anger, very strong anger. So stopping those thoughts, like intentional thoughts of covetousness and anger. So those are actions by your mind, right? Different from just like anger arising. This is like you're cultivating it, you're actively, so it's stopping that. And then also wrong view, the Buddha actually says is part of mental conduct. So how are you thinking about the world? Are you actively denying and rejecting and closing your mind off to things like karma and so on? The Buddha says that's not good mental conduct. So yeah, those are some examples, and that might sound overly, maybe I sound like that sounds very moralistic or like very preachy or something, which, to a certain extent, sometimes we need to be preached to, right? Sometimes that's what we need. We need to get over the fact that we are acting unskillfully. Though I doubt that, I hope that that's not the true view of Tian. I'm not accusing you of anything. But the other thing to keep in mind is that sila is the cause of happiness. So when we have a sense of inner goodness, we feel good in ourselves. Others trust us. Our mind wants to be with itself. It doesn't, as I often say, I repeat this many, many times, you don't want to be sitting with a jerk. Okay, so I put you in a room for 8 hours. It's you and someone who kills, steals, cheats, lies, drinks, abuses, divides, yaps, is covetous, is angry, and has wrong view. And you have to listen to they're going to talk to you for 8 hours straight, and you have to sit there and meditate. They're going to tell you all the things that they do. They're going to tell you and distract you. They're going to be hateful and greedy, and they're going to be restless. And you have to sit there and be peaceful. It's going to be hard. It's not going to be pleasant. So who is this friend? Who is this person in the room? It is none other than your mind. So if you train your mind to be a jerk, you don't want to be with a jerk, right? You do not want to be with a jerk. So you're going to want to be thinking about something else. Thinking about what you did before the meditation, after, daydreaming, sleeping, TV, music, whatever. Because anything but being around a jerk. So when we have a sense of goodness, like, I'm a good person, I'm a nice person, I'm kind, and you feel safe, then you want to be around you. You want to meditate. You want to sit still with yourself for 8 hours. And you will feel confident. Others accuse you, you'll know there's nothing to be afraid of. Others blame you, you'll know that you don't have anything blameworthy to be blamed about. When you die, you don't have to be fearful. If there is an afterlife, you know that you've put in the conditions for a good one. If there's not an afterlife, you don't have to die confused and afraid. You die with good life. You've done good, and you don't need to be afraid of what happens after. If you don't, then you do need to be. You will be afraid because you don't know what's going to come after, and you're going to die in that life with regrets, and other people will be, less happy about you, and also you'll be afraid of the next life, and so on. So there's many benefits to sila in meditation and so on. And there's also other benefits, but we don't really have the time to go into like all the benefits of sila. But some of the other benefits include, that you start to develop your mind and understand your mind on a subtle level. Your intentions throughout the day, your habits are very ingrained. There's a lot there. There's a lot going on. Investigating that, learning about that, That is very profound. You get a lot of wisdom and you're training your mind. So sila is the training wheels, right? If you can't train your mind, like on the level of your body, like if your mind is so greedy, angry, and confused that your body acts out, then let alone when you're sitting still. If it's so greedy, angry, confused that your tongue acts out, let alone when you're sitting still, let alone just the thoughts. So it's the training wheels. You're training your mind with your body and you're training your mind with your speech. So then you can train your mind directly in meditation. So you're learning about the mind, you're training the mind. And so those are all benefits of sila, all reasons to practice sila. And of course, if you want to be born in heaven, then of course that is a benefit. Many people often come into meditation not wanting that, but actually, a lot of people, that's part of why they cultivate sila. So if you want to go to a nice place, think, yay, heaven. Well, you have to cultivate sila. And even if you don't follow the 5 precepts, you're probably not going to be likely to be born as a human. So to be born as a human, you have to basically have an establishment of the 5 precepts. So, as a human, what is a real human? Is what we say in Buddhism. Is what makes a human, right? So what did Plato say? It's a biped without feathers, right? And then, I don't know if it's a true story. I can't remember where it comes from. And then his disciple takes a chicken and plucks out all the feathers, and here's your human, right? So then what does Aristotle say? He says it's an animal with reasoning, right? It's an animal with rationality. What does the Buddha say? What does Buddhism say? What is a human? It is a creature with morality. It's a creature with integrity. It's a creature which is able to follow the 5 precepts, which is able to be morally integral, morally good, morally whole, morally restrained. That's what a human is. So pigs, cats, they can't do that. So if you can't do it, I don't need to say anymore, right? So it's the same. So we don't want to be born in a bad place. We really want to avoid that. So it's very, it's important to have a sense of like, it's dangerous, not to follow sila to a healthy extent, but it is, it's important to say that because it's just not something we're taught in, in a culture which tends to materialism. You might just be taught, YOLO. Well, that's not the case in Buddhism. So it's good to just have a healthy sense of like, it's important, it's good. Okay. So almost time to close up. Rick says, can you talk about how to work with the mind when it's rolling in anxiety? I think I addressed this one. I wish I could give it more time, but we're just so limited. But I wish the main thing that I really want to say about this, Rick, is that remembering that your mind, when it's anxious, it's trying to protect you. Anxiety is a form of fear. It's a form of worry, right? So your mind is saying, oh, I want to be safe. I want to protect you. So what you do is you say, oh, thank you, mind. That's really good. You want to be safe. You want to be happy. May you be happy. May you be safe. But actually, this worry is not helping. This worry is making it worse. So it's okay. You can be happy. You can be safe. You don't need to worry about this. I'm going to work with you, and we're gonna do our best to avoid the dangerous bad thing that you're afraid of. So yeah. Okay, and yeah, it looks like we're almost out of time, and we have about 1 to 2 more questions. So we'll try to lightning round. What can one do when life requires constant engagement and things that feel draining and disconnected from the heart? If the things one truly loves may not provide a stable means of living, change your life choices. And Lily says, is it generally easier to learn Pali through one's mother tongue rather than through a second language? Probably, yeah, probably would be easier, but it probably would be easier through English or something, just because there's so many Pali resources in English. Whereas if you try to learn it in Mongolian, it's probably going to be pretty difficult. There might be like 1 textbook translated from English. So probably if you know English or a language that is common, like Sinhala or something, Thai, then it'd be easier. But yeah. Okay, so this time it's time to close. So sadhu everyone for your practice, for listening to the Dhamma. One of the highest blessings is listening to the Dhamma, right? Dhamma savanang etam mangalam uttamang. So listening to the Dhamma at the right time is a blessing. So sadhu for this blessing. I hope that it brings you many good things. And I hope that your practice goes well. And we'll see you for any future live streams here or any future events at the monastery if you're in the area. So have a good night and be well, happy and peaceful.